The blood-red sun cast long shadows across Bozeman, Montana. As Violet James stumbled from the stagecoach, her heart racing with equal parts exhaustion and fear. Her trembling fingers clutched a crumpled letter, the final warning that had sent her fleeing west. "I will find you," Charles had written, "no matter where you hide." 3 weeks of hard travel hadn't erased the memory of his hands around her throat or the promise in his cold eyes. The frontier town sprawled before her, raw and unfinished like an artist's rough sketch, a single muddy main street lined with wooden buildings, the scent of sawdust and livestock heavy in the air. Bozeman in 1872 was exactly what she'd hoped for, a place where a woman could disappear, where the vast Montana territory might swallow her whole. "First time in Bozeman, miss." The stagecoach driver handed down her single battered suitcase, eyeing her city clothes with mild curiosity. "Yes," she answered, brushing trail dust from her dark blue traveling dress. "Is there somewhere a lady might find respectable lodging? Widow Parker runs a boarding house yonder." He pointed toward a white 2-story building at the edge of town. "Clean beds, fair prices, no questions asked." His knowing look told Violet he'd seen her kind before, women running from something or someone. Violet nodded her thanks, gathered her skirts, and stepped carefully around a patch of mud. The journey had depleted nearly all her savings, the money she'd secretly tucked away during 5 years of marriage to Charles. 5 years of walking on eggshells, of bruises hidden beneath high collars, of whispered apologies and promises that things would change. She was halfway to the boarding house when she felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. Violet froze, her breath catching. Had Charles somehow followed her already? Her eyes darted frantically around the dusty street, searching for his familiar silhouette. Instead, her gaze locked with that of a tall man leaning against the hitching post outside what appeared to be the town's only saloon. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could feel the intensity of his stare. Unlike the other men who'd eyed her with obvious interest throughout her journey, his expression held something different, something measured and assessing. Violet hurried on, clutching her suitcase tighter. She couldn't afford suspicion from anyone, not when her life depended on disappearing. Widow Parker turned out to be a stout woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Room's $2 a week," she stated, looking Violet up and down. "Includes breakfast and supper. No gentlemen callers, no liquor, no coming in after 9 o'clock. "That suits me perfectly," Violet replied, counting out coins from her dwindling funds. "What brings you to Bozeman, Mrs.?" "Miss," Violet corrected quickly. "Miss James, I'm seeking employment." The lie came easily after weeks of practice. Mrs. Parker's eyebrows rose slightly. "Not many positions for a lady of your refinement." She gestured to Violet's quality dress, now travel-worn but clearly expensive. "Though I hear the new schoolteacher took ill and left town last week. Board's looking for a replacement." Hope fluttered in Violet's chest. She had worked briefly as a teacher's assistant before her marriage. "Where might I inquire about such a position?" "Town hall tomorrow morning. Mr. Daniels is the head of the school board." Mrs. Parker handed over a small brass key. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, first door on the right." That night, Violet lay awake in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town, distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional shout of laughter or argument, the constant wind whistling through the poorly sealed window frame. The uncertainty of her future pressed down on her with suffocating weight, but beneath it lay something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. Morning came with the clatter of dishes and the smell of coffee brewing. Violet dressed in her best remaining outfit, a forest green walking dress with minimal embellishment, and arranged her dark auburn hair in a simple but neat style. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, thinner, with shadows beneath her hazel eyes, but something new in her expression. Determination, perhaps. The town looked different by daylight, busier, more purposeful. Cowboys and freight drivers mingled with shopkeepers and housewives along the boardwalks. Violet kept her eyes down, mindful that any stranger could be a potential threat. Charles had connections, money, and a ruthless determination that had made him successful in business and terrifying as a husband. Town Hall turned out to be a modest wooden building serving multiple purposes: courthouse, meeting place, and apparently school board headquarters. Inside, Violet found a balding man with spectacles reviewing papers at a desk. "Excuse me, I'm inquiring about the schoolteacher position." The man looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Indeed, you're interested in the position, Miss James, Violet James." She straightened her shoulders. "I have experience as a teacher's assistant in Boston." Mr. Daniels removed his spectacles, cleaning them thoughtfully with a handkerchief. "Boston, you say? What brings you all the way to Montana territory?" The question she dreaded. "I was seeking a change," she replied carefully. "I've always been drawn to the opportunities of the West." His skepticism was evident, but Bozeman was desperate enough for educated people that he didn't press further. "The school has 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years. The pay is $30 a month, with lodging provided in the rooms above the schoolhouse." Violet's heart leaped. A position with housing would solve her most immediate concerns. "When might I begin?" "Can you start Monday?" "The children have been without proper instruction for nearly 2 weeks." "I would be delighted," she answered, almost light-headed with relief. As she exited Town Hall, the sunshine seemed brighter, the mountain air sweeter. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, Violet allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps here, in this rough-hewn town in the shadow of mountains, she might forge a new life beyond Charles's reach. Her moment of optimism shattered when she collided with a solid chest just outside the door. "Pardon me, madam." Strong hands steadied her, then released her immediately when she flinched. Violet looked up into the face of the man she'd noticed yesterday, the one who'd watched her so intently. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar traced its way from his temple to his jawline. "Entirely my fault," she murmured, stepping back. "You're new to town." It wasn't a question. "Yes." She hesitated, unsure why his direct gaze unsettled her so. He wasn't looking at her the way men typically did, with interest or dismissal. Instead, he seemed to be reading her, cataloging details. "Wade Reynolds," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Town marshal." Violet's blood ran cold. Of course, the one person in town she should most avoid was its lawman. If Charles sent inquiries to local authorities, this man would be his point of contact. "Violet James," she replied, her mouth suddenly dry. "I've just accepted the schoolteacher position." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or doubt. "That's welcome news. The children need some stability." "If you'll excuse me, Marshal Reynolds, I have arrangements to make." She attempted to step around him. "Miss James." His voice stopped her. "Bozeman can be a difficult place for newcomers. If you need assistance." He left the offer hanging. "Thank you, but I'll manage." Violet hurried away, feeling his eyes on her back with each step. Back at the boarding house, she informed Mrs. Parker of her new position and packed her meager belongings. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a plain rectangular building with tall windows. The upper floor, accessible by an exterior staircase, contained 2 small rooms, a bedroom and a sitting area with a tiny kitchen alcove. The accommodations were sparse but clean, and Violet spent the weekend preparing lessons and exploring her new home. She discovered the previous teacher had left behind most of her books and teaching materials, apparently too ill for a methodical departure. By Monday morning, Violet stood nervously before 28 curious faces, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "Good morning. I am Miss James, your new teacher." Her voice gained strength as she spoke. "We have much to learn together." The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Afternoons supervising recitations and exercises. Evenings grading papers and preparing lessons by lamplight. The simplicity of the routine was healing in its own way. For the first time in years, Violet lived without the constant tension of anticipating Charles's moods, without monitoring her every word and gesture. The children, initially wary, gradually warmed to her. Little Mary Foster brought her wildflowers gathered on the way to school. The Sullivan boys, notorious troublemakers, began competing for her approving smiles when they mastered difficult sums. Even taciturn Thomas Green, at 16 nearly a man, showed unexpected aptitude for poetry when encouraged. Weeks passed, and with them, some of Violet's constant fear began to recede. She made cautious acquaintances Mrs. Wallace at the general store, who always saved the newest Harper's Weekly for her, Dr. Collins, who invited her to Sunday dinners with his family, Betsy Applewhite, a young wife who asked for help writing letters to her family back east, but she couldn't shake the sense of Marshal Reynolds watching her. He seemed to materialize wherever she went, tipping his hat as she walked to school, appearing at the general store when she shopped for supplies, patrolling past the schoolhouse during recess. Each time, his eyes held the same measuring look, neither hostile nor friendly, simply observant. Spring warmed into summer, bringing longer days, and the scent of wildflowers carried on mountain breezes. Violet found unexpected joy in small pleasures, the way morning light streamed through her classroom windows, the pride in a child's face when mastering a difficult lesson, the simple freedom of walking unaccompanied through town without fear of rebuke. On a particularly warm Saturday in late June, Violet ventured to the small creek that ran just beyond town. Removing her shoes and stockings, she dipped her feet in the cool water, allowing herself a moment of pure contentment as she watched a family of ducks paddle upstream. "Miss James." She startled, nearly falling into the water. Marshal Reynolds stood a few yards away, leading his horse by the reins. "Marshal," she acknowledged, hurriedly pulling her feet from the water. "I didn't hear you approach. Didn't mean to frighten you." He remained where he was, giving her space. "Just returning from patrol," Violet nodded, unsure what to say. This was their first encounter without the buffer of other townspeople nearby. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke again. "You've settled in well. The school board's pleased with your work." "Thank you." She busied herself putting on her stockings, uncomfortable under his steady gaze. "The children have taken to you. Even the green boy, his father says he's talking about books at home now." Despite her wariness, Violet smiled. "Thomas has a natural affinity for literature. He simply needed encouragement." The marshal was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're running from something, Miss James." Her hands froze. "I beg your pardon," or someone. His voice remained even, matter of fact. "I've been marshal here 3 years. I recognize the signs." Panic fluttered in her chest. "I don't know what you mean. You check over your shoulder when you walk. You startle at loud noises. You avoid questions about your past." He listed her behaviors with unnerving accuracy. "And you watch strangers, especially men, like they might be carrying a snake in their pocket." Violet stood, gathering her dignity around her like a cloak. My personal history is not a matter for public speculation, Marshal Reynolds. No, he agreed. It's not. But if there's trouble coming, trouble that might affect my town, I need to know. There's no trouble, she insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. The marshal studied her face, then nodded once. If that changes, my office is always open. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. The town's hosting a Independence Day picnic next week. Might do you good to attend, become more a part of things. Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Violet trembling beside the creek. That night, she barely slept, contemplating her options. If the marshal had noticed her behavior, had others? How long before someone connected her to the society wife who had disappeared from Philadelphia? Charles would have circulated her description, perhaps offered rewards. The papers back east might even have carried the story: the devoted husband searching for his missing wife, feared victim of foul play or amnesia. By morning, she'd resolved to be more careful, to blend in better. Attending the town picnic, as the marshal suggested, might actually help. What better way to appear settled and unremarkable than to participate in community events? The 4th of July dawned clear and hot. The entire town gathered in the meadow beyond the church, where tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family. Children raced about with sparklers and flags. Cowboys showed off roping tricks, and a small band played patriotic tunes on fiddles and harmonicas. Violet brought a berry pie, made from wild raspberries she'd gathered herself. The domestic act felt strange. Charles had employed a cook, and Violet's attempts at kitchen work had often earned his ridicule. Yet here, the women exclaimed over her pie's perfect crust, and Violet felt a small glow of pride. The day passed pleasantly, with races for the children, speeches by town dignitaries, and a shooting contest that had everyone cheering. Violet found herself laughing more than she had in years, momentarily free from the shadow of fear that had become her constant companion. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit and the band switched to dancing tunes. Couples took to the cleared space near the bandstand, and Violet watched with a mixture of enjoyment and melancholy. Charles had been an excellent dancer. It was at a winter ball that he had first charmed her, sweeping her across the floor with practiced grace. How different that handsome, attentive suitor had been from the man who emerged after their wedding. "May I have this dance, Miss James?" Marshal Reynolds stood before her, hat in hand. Up close, without his badge and gun belt, he looked different, less the stern lawman and more a man like any other, albeit one with eyes that seemed to see too much. Propriety dictated she accept, though every instinct warned against drawing attention or forming connections. "Thank you, Marshal." His hand at her waist was respectful, maintaining proper distance as they joined the other dancers. Violet was surprised to find him light on his feet, guiding her skillfully through the steps of the waltz. "You dance well for a frontier lawman," she observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted her sons learn proper manners, frontier or no, said civilization depended on it." A wise woman, she was. His tone suggested she was no longer living, taught school herself back in Missouri. Violet felt herself softening slightly toward him. "Is that where you're from, originally? Came west after the war?" His eyes held memories he didn't voice. "You're from back east." "Boston, you said." The gentle interrogation wasn't lost on her. "Yes, though I traveled some before coming to Montana." "Running takes a toll," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Whatever you're fleeing, Miss James, it doesn't need to follow you forever." Violet missed a step, but his steady hand kept her from faltering. "You presume too much, Marshal." "Perhaps." His expression remained neutral. "Or perhaps I recognize the look because I've worn it myself. Before she could respond, the music ended. Marshal Reynolds released her hand and bowed slightly. "Thank you for the dance, Miss James." He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Violet unsettled. The marshal's words had touched something raw and vulnerable within her, the longing to stop running, to trust someone with her truth. But she'd trusted Charles once too, believed in the future he'd promised. That trust had nearly cost her life. As summer stretched into autumn, Violet found a tentative peace in her new routine. The school term began again with 5 new pupils, children of families who had recently settled in the area. She added botany lessons, taking the children on nature walks to collect and press specimens. In the evenings, she often read by lamplight or worked on a quilt, domestic pastimes that soothed her restless mind. Her interactions with Marshal Reynolds remained cordial but distant. He continued his habit of appearing wherever she went, but his questions had ceased after their dance. Instead, he limited himself to weather observations or inquiries about her students' progress. Violet found herself watching him too, noting how he mediated disputes with calm authority, how the rowdiest cowboys quieted under his steady gaze, how mothers trusted him to find their wandering children. One crisp October afternoon, as Violet dismissed her students for the day, she noticed a stranger loitering across the street. A well-dressed man with a city cut to his clothes, watching the school with obvious interest. Her heart stuttered in her chest. It wasn't Charles. This man was shorter, stockier, but he could easily be someone Charles had hired. A Pinkerton detective, perhaps, or one of the private investigators her husband had sometimes employed for business matters. The children scattered toward their homes, and Violet retreated inside, locking the door with trembling hands. Through the window, she observed the man approach the school, studying it carefully before knocking. "Miss James," he called, "I'd like a word, if you please." Violet remained silent, heart pounding. "I know you're in there. I've come a long way to find you." Terror closed her throat. This was what she had dreaded for months: discovery, exposure, being dragged back to Philadelphia, and the hell of her marriage. She frantically considered her options. The rear window. No, he would surely circle the building if she didn't answer. Hide. There were few places in the sparse schoolhouse that would conceal her. The man knocked again, more forcefully. "Mrs. Blackwood, or do you prefer Miss James now?" The use of Charles's surname confirmed her worst fears. Violet backed away from the door, looking desperately for anything she might use as a weapon. The heavy brass bell she rang to signal the start of classes sat on her desk. She seized it, its weight reassuring in her palm. "Open up, or I'll break the door down," the man called, his cordial tone giving way to impatience. "Mr. Blackwood is offering a substantial reward for your return." A shadow fell across the window. He was peering inside. Violet pressed herself against the wall, out of sight, calculating the distance to the back door. The unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked froze both Violet and the stranger. "Step away from the school, Mr." Marshal Reynolds's voice, normally even, carried an edge of steel Violet had never heard before. "This is a private matter, friend." The stranger's tone remained confident. "Between a husband and his wayward wife." "There's no Mrs. Blackwood in this town," Reynolds replied. "And you're trespassing on public property. Move away from the door." Through a crack in the curtain, Violet could see them, the stranger facing the marshal, who stood with his revolver pointed steadily at the man's chest. "There's a $1,000 reward for information leading to the return of Violet Blackwood to her husband in Philadelphia," the stranger said. "I tracked her to Laramie, then lost her trail. Took me months to pick it up again. But that's her inside Violet Blackwood, going by Violet James." "The lady's name is Miss James," Reynolds said firmly. She's our school teacher and a respected member of this community. Now, I'm not asking again. Move away from the door and state your business in Bozeman, or I'll escort you to the jail until you're more cooperative." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before the stranger raised his hand slightly. "Name's Howard Phelps. I'm a private investigator from Chicago, hired by Charles Blackwood to locate his missing wife." He reached slowly into his coat pocket. "I have papers. Keep your hands where I can see them," Reynolds ordered. "You can show your papers at my office." Violet watched, hardly breathing, as the marshal marched the investigator down the street toward the jail. Only when they disappeared from view did she slump against the wall, the brass bell slipping from her numb fingers with a dull thud. Her carefully constructed piece had shattered. If one investigator had found her, others would follow. Or worse, Charles himself might come. She needed to run again tonight, before the marshal released the investigator, or before Charles received word of her location. With shaking hands, Violet began gathering her most essential belongings. The money she had saved from her teaching salary, not much, but enough perhaps to reach California or Oregon. A change of clothes, her mother's locket, the book of poetry Thomas had given her for her birthday. A knock at the door startled her from her frantic packing. "Miss James, it's Reynolds." Violet hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door. The marshal stood alone, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" She stepped back, allowing him entry. "Is he locked up for now? Disorderly conduct, threatening a school teacher. It won't hold him long, but it buys us some time." "Us?" Violet echoed. Marshal Reynolds glanced at her half-packed bag. "You're planning to run." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I have to. If he found me, others will too, or Charles will come himself." "Tell me about him." The marshal's voice was quiet but firm. "All of it." Violet looked away. "Why? So you can decide if I deserve your help, or if you should telegraph my husband that you've found his property." "So I can understand what we're dealing with," he corrected gently. "So I can protect you properly." The simple declaration, "protect you," broke something inside her. Tears she had refused to shed for months welled in her eyes. "He'll kill me if he finds me," she whispered. "He nearly did the last time." Reynolds guided her to a chair, then took a seat across from her, patient and steady. Haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, Violet told her story. Her whirlwind courtship with Charles Blackwood, a rising star in Philadelphia banking circles. The charming suitor who had transformed into a controlling husband before the honeymoon ended. The first slap, over a dinner she'd ordered prepared that wasn't to his liking. His tearful apologies and promises to change. The gradual isolation from her friends and family. The escalating violence, always behind closed doors, always followed by expensive gifts and public displays of devotion. "The final time," she said, her voice hollow, "I spilled tea on a business associate's wife. An accident. My hands shake constantly around him now. When we got home, he—" She touched her throat unconsciously. "I thought I would die there on our bedroom floor. When I woke, he had gone to his club, assuming I'd learned my lesson. I took what money I had hidden away and fled that night." Throughout her account, Reynolds's expression had darkened, his jaw tightening and hands curling into fists against his thighs. Now, he reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers. "He won't touch you again," he promised, and the quiet certainty in his voice almost made her believe it. "You don't know him," Violet said. "He has money connections. He donates to political campaigns, has judges at his dinner table. His family has been in Philadelphia society for generations." "This isn't Philadelphia." Reynolds's gray eyes held hers. "And I'm not impressed by Eastern money or connections. What do you suggest I do? I can't keep running forever, but I can't stay here now that he knows where I am." The marshal stood, pacing the small schoolroom. "I'll hold Phelps as long as legally possible. 3 days, maybe 4. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "To make sure your husband never finds you." His expression was resolute. "Do you trust me, Miss James?" Did she? This man who had watched her so carefully for months, who had seen through her attempts at deception from the beginning. Yet he had also protected her without hesitation, had listened to her story without judgment. "Yes," she said finally. "I believe I do." "Then go home, pack what you need not for running but for a short journey. Meet me behind the livery stable at midnight. Tell no one." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." He moved toward the door. "Don't be late." Violet spent the evening in a state of contained panic, alternating between trust in the marshal's plan and terror that she was making a fatal mistake. What if he intended to turn her over to Charles for the reward? What if his protection extended only to escorting her to a stagecoach out of town? Yet when midnight came, she found herself behind the livery as instructed, a small valise in hand. The marshal appeared silently from the shadows, leading 2 saddled horses. "Can you ride astride?" he asked. Violet nodded. Growing up in rural Pennsylvania before her parents' deaths, she had often ridden her father's horses. "Good. We need to move quickly and quietly." He helped her mount, then swung into his own saddle. They rode in silence through the sleeping town and into the darkness beyond, following a narrow trail that wound into the foothills. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead with an intensity Violet had never seen in Philadelphia's smoke-dimmed skies. After perhaps 2 hours of steady riding, Reynolds led them off the trail and into a stand of pines. A small cabin materialized in the darkness, its windows dark. "My place," he explained as he helped her dismount. "Not many folks know about it. I come here when I need quiet." Inside, the cabin was spare but comfortable, a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and various supplies organized on shelves along the walls. Reynolds quickly built a fire, the growing flames revealing more details, books stacked beside the bed, a guitar leaning in one corner, a quilt with intricate stitching draped over a chair. "It's not much," he said, watching her take in the space, "but it's secure. We can plan our next steps here." "Our next steps," Violet repeated, confused. "I don't understand what you're proposing, Marshal." "Wade," he corrected. "If we're going to get through this together, you should use my given name." "Wade," she amended, the familiarity strange on her tongue. "What exactly is your plan?" "I can't hide in your cabin forever." He gestured for her to sit by the fire. "No, but you can disappear in plain sight. I tried that in Bozeman." "You tried becoming someone else while remaining alone and vulnerable," he countered. "I'm suggesting something different." Violet waited as he seemed to gather his thoughts. "Marry me," he said finally. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Not for real," he added hastily. "At least, not in the way you're thinking. A marriage of convenience on paper. Violet James becomes Violet Reynolds. Your husband would be looking for a widow or a single woman using her maiden name, not a marshal's wife." "That's," she shook her head, struggling to process his suggestion. "That's absurd and illegal. I'm already married." "According to whom?" Wade challenged. "There are no records of your marriage in Montana territory. No one here knows you as Mrs. Blackwood except an investigator currently cooling his heels in my jail." "But I would know," Violet protested. "And so would you. It would be living a lie." Wade ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Sometimes a lie that keeps you alive is better than a truth that gets you killed." His words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Violet turned away, staring into the fire as she considered his proposal. A paper marriage, a shield against Charles and his hunters. It was practical in its way, but it was also intimate, binding her life to this man she hardly knew. "Why would you do this?" she asked finally. "Risk your reputation, your position, for a woman you barely know?" Something flickered across Wade's face, an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you're kind to children who others find difficult. I know you spend your own money on books and supplies for students who can't afford them. I know you've never spoken ill of anyone in this town, even when they deserved it." He paused. "And I know what it's like to be hunted." The last statement hung between them and offered confidence she hadn't expected. "The war," she guessed. He nodded. "Served with a Missouri regiment, Confederate side. After Appomattox, there were those who thought certain officers should pay beyond surrender. I came west, changed my name, started over." His eyes met hers. "Everyone deserves that chance, Violet." The use of her given name, spoken softly in the firelit cabin, affected her more than it should have. "If I agreed," she said carefully, "what would happen after? When would this arrangement end?" "Whenever you wished it," he answered. "A year, 5 years, long enough for your husband to give up the search. Then a quiet divorce on grounds of abandonment if you wanted to move on." The practicality of his thinking both reassured and saddened her. This was not a romantic proposal, but a strategic alliance. Yet there was something in his eyes that suggested more a warmth, a concern that went beyond duty. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course." He rose. "Take the bed. I'll keep watch outside for a while, then sleep by the fire." Left alone, Violet paced the small cabin, weighing her options. She could continue running, always looking over her shoulder. She could return to Bozeman, face the investigator, and hope the law would protect her from Charles, a gamble she knew was unlikely to succeed. Or she could accept Wade's offer, this strange partnership that would tie her to a man she was only beginning to know. In the quiet of the night, with only the crackling fire as witness, Violet acknowledged a truth she had been avoiding. She was drawn to Wade Reynolds. Not merely grateful for his protection, but genuinely intrigued by the man himself, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the depths she sensed behind his reserved demeanor. When he returned to the cabin hours later, she had made her decision. "Yes," she said simply as he closed the door behind him. "I'll marry you on paper as you suggested, but I have conditions." Wade raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement softening his tired features. "Name them." "I keep my position as schoolteacher. I maintain my own quarters above the school. Our arrangement remains private, a legal convenience, nothing more." Agreed, though it might raise eyebrows if a newly married couple lives apart. Violet hadn't considered that. In a small town like Bozeman, such an arrangement would indeed invite speculation. "Then we'll need a convincing reason." "We can say the school board requires the teacher to live on premises," Wade suggested. "It's not unheard of." "Very well." She took a deep breath. "One more condition. This ends when Charles is no longer a threat, whether that's in 1 year or 10. No questions asked, no obligations." Wade studied her face. "And if circumstances change, if one of us wants something different?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "Then we discuss it as reasonable adults," she answered carefully. "But I won't make promises beyond protecting each other from Charles Blackwood." He nodded, accepting her terms. "We should return to town tomorrow. I'll arrange for the circuit judge to marry us when he arrives next week." "So soon?" "Phelps won't stay locked up forever. And when he's released, he'll report back to your husband. We need to be established as husband and wife before that happens." The reality of what she was agreeing to settled over Violet. Not just a paper marriage, but a public one, standing before a judge, speaking vows, signing a document that would bind her to this man. What about your reputation, your position? If Charles discovers your involvement, let me worry about that. Wade's voice was firm. I've faced worse than an angry banker from Philadelphia. They rode back to Bozeman at dawn, taking a different route to avoid being seen approaching town together. Wade went directly to the jail to check on his prisoner, while Violet slipped back into her quarters above the school, her absence hopefully unnoticed. The next days passed in a blur of contained anxiety. Violet taught her classes as usual, trying to maintain normalcy while her mind raced with contingency plans. Wade released Phelps after extracting a promise that he would leave town immediately, but Violet had no illusions that the investigator was truly gone. More likely he was watching, gathering information for Charles. Judge Harrington arrived on Thursday's stage as scheduled. By Friday afternoon, with only the town clerk and Dr. Collins as witnesses, Violet found herself standing before the judge in his temporary chambers at Town Hall, speaking vows she had never expected to repeat. I, Violet Ann James, take thee, Wade Thomas Reynolds. The words felt surreal on her lips, especially knowing her first marriage remained legally valid. Yet as Wade's steady gaze held hers, as his hand clasped hers with gentle firmness, something shifted inside her, a tiny fragment of trust taking root where only fear had lived for so long. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Harrington declared. You may kiss your bride, Marshal. Wade's eyes asked a silent question. Violet gave a barely perceptible nod. His lips brushed hers briefly, a formal seal on their arrangement rather than a passionate embrace. Yet the simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her body. Congratulations, Dr. Collins said, pumping Wade's hand enthusiastically. Quite the surprise, though I can't say I didn't see the way you watched each other. He winked at Violet, who blushed despite herself. We'd appreciate your discretion, Wade told both witnesses, given Miss James' Mrs. Reynolds's position with the school. We'd like to inform the board properly before news spreads. Both men nodded their understanding, though Violet had no doubt the gossip would begin circulating within hours. Bozeman might be growing, but news still traveled at the speed of conversation. By evening, as Wade had predicted, several townspeople had stopped by the schoolhouse with congratulations and knowing smiles. Widow Parker arrived with a small cake, her sharp eyes taking in Violet's continued presence in the teachers' quarters, rather than the marshal's modest house on the other side of town. The school board requires the teacher to maintain residence here, Violet explained, the rehearsed excuse sounding hollow to her own ears. Was all Mrs. Parker said, but her expression spoke volumes. After the well-wishers departed, Violet and Wade sat at her small table, the remains of the cake between them, discussing their next steps. Phelps left town this morning, Wade reported. Headed east on the stage. To report to Charles, Violet concluded, her stomach clenching. Most likely. Which means we have perhaps 2 weeks before he decides on his next move. What do you think he'll do? Wade considered the question. If I were him, I'd send another investigator, someone you wouldn't recognize, to confirm Phelps's report. Or he might come himself, depending on how determined he is. He's determined, Violet said quietly. Charles doesn't lose, neither do I. Wade's voice carried absolute conviction, but we need to be prepared. You should move some essentials to my house enough to make it look like you split time between there and here. We need to be seen together around town, establishing ourselves as a married couple. A performance, Violet murmured. For now, Wade agreed, though something in his tone suggested he might hope for more eventually. Over the following days, Violet and Wade enacted their charade with careful attention to detail. They attended Sunday services together, dined at the hotel restaurant, and walked arm in arm through town in the evenings. Wade began escorting her to and from school each day, a protective gesture that was both part of their act and, Violet suspected, a genuine precaution. To her surprise, the pretense wasn't as difficult as she had feared. Wade was considerate company, intelligent, well-read despite his frontier upbringing, and possessed of a dry humor that occasionally broke through his serious demeanor. Their conversations ranged from literature to history to the small dramas of town life. He never pressed for physical affection beyond what was necessary for their public performance, respecting the boundaries she had established. Yet Violet found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement. The breadth of his shoulders when he removed his coat in the evening, the surprising gentleness of his calloused hands when he helped her down from a wagon, the rare smile that transformed his weather-worn face from handsome to breathtaking. These observations troubled her. She had sworn never again to give her heart to a man, never to make herself vulnerable to that kind of power. Her arrangement with Wade was meant to be practical, not emotional. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest when he appeared at the schoolhouse door each afternoon, or the disappointment she felt on the evenings he was called away for marshal duties. November brought early snow and the town's preparations for Thanksgiving. Violet threw herself into school activities, organizing a pageant where her students would recite poetry and historical passages. Wade helped construct the simple stage in the schoolroom, working alongside fathers who had begun treating him with new respect since his marriage. "You've changed him," Mrs. Wallace commented as Violet selected fabric for costumes at the general store. The marshal was always fair and respected, but he kept to himself. Now he smiles sometimes. Violet wasn't sure how to respond to such observations. Were they truly changing each other, or merely playing parts so convincingly that even they were starting to believe the performance? The Thanksgiving pageant was a success, with nearly every family in town crowding into the schoolhouse to watch their children perform. Afterward, many continued to the town hall for a communal feast. Violet sat beside Wade at one of the long tables, accepting congratulations on both the pageant and their recent marriage. "Never thought I'd see the day Reynolds took a wife," old Mr. Simmons declared, raising his cider and toast. "Takes a special woman to tame a lone wolf." "I'm hardly tamed, Simmons," Wade replied good-naturedly, but his hand found Violet's under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze that sent her pulse racing. As they walked home through the snowy night, Wade more relaxed than Violet had ever seen him after the warmth and cider of the celebration. He surprised her by saying, "Thank you." "For what?" "For this." He gestured vaguely between them. "I know it began as necessity, but it's been good having someone." The simple admission touched her deeply. "You've been alone a long time," she observed, "by choice." His breath formed clouds in the cold air. "After the war, after everything, it seemed safer that way." "I understand that feeling," she said softly. They reached the front of the schoolhouse where they would typically part Wade to his home, Violet to her quarters above the school. But tonight, Wade hesitated. "It's cold in that schoolroom," he said. "The stove never heats it properly. I manage." "You could," he stopped, then tried again. "My house has a good fireplace, and I make decent coffee in the morning." Violet understood what he was offering, not just warmth and coffee, but a step toward making their arrangement less of a performance and more of a reality. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Not tonight," she said gently, "but thank you for the offer." Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "The invitation stands, whenever you're ready." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his lips against her cheek. "Good night, Violet." "Good night, Wade." She watched him walk away through the falling snow, her cheek tingling where his lips had touched. Inside her quarters, Violet leaned against the closed door, confused by the strength of her reaction. This was dangerous territory, developing genuine feelings for a man she was legally bound to, but had promised to leave when circumstances allowed. Yet that night, as the wind howled around the eaves of the schoolhouse, Violet found herself imagining the warmth of Wade's fireplace, the comfort of his presence, the possibility of something real growing between them. December arrived with bitter cold and preparations for Christmas. The children were restless with excitement, making paper decorations for the schoolroom and practicing carols for the church service. Violet found herself caught up in the holiday spirit, despite her lingering anxiety about Charles. No word had come from Philadelphia. No strangers had appeared in town asking questions. Perhaps, she dared to hope, her marriage had worked as a deterrent. Wade invited her to help decorate his house for the holidays, and Violet found herself agreeing. They spent a pleasant Sunday afternoon hanging evergreen boughs and setting candles in the windows. When Wade produced a small box of delicate glass ornaments, "My mother's," he explained, Violet felt honored by the sharing of this piece of his past. "These are beautiful," she said, carefully unwrapping a hand-painted ball depicting a winter scene. "Christmas was her favorite," Wade said, a distant look in his eyes. "Even during the war, with everything rationed, she managed to make it special somehow. You miss her." "Every day." He hung an ornament on the small pine tree they had set up in the corner. "She would have liked you." The simple statement warmed Violet more than it should have. "Tell me about her," she requested, settling on the sofa near the fire. Wade sat beside her, closer than their usual careful distance, and spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his mother's determined optimism in the face of hardship, her insistence that her sons learn both practical skills and book learning, the garden she tended with fanatical devotion. Violet found herself sharing memories of her own parents, her father's love of poetry, her mother's talent for music, painful recollections she had locked away during her years with Charles. The afternoon slipped into evening, conversation flowing easily between them as the fire burned low. When Wade offered to make supper, Violet surprised herself by accepting. They worked together in the small kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple cobbler for dessert. "You're a better cook than I expected, Marshal Reynolds," Violet teased as they washed dishes afterward. "Necessity teaches many skills," he replied with a half-smile. "Though I'll admit, food tastes better with company." The moment felt delicate, balanced on the edge of something new. Violet knew she should leave, return to her quarters above the school as she always did. Yet the thought of the cold walk, the empty room, held little appeal compared to the warmth of Wade's house and his company. "It's snowing harder," Wade observed, looking out the window. "Perhaps you should stay. I can take the sofa." The offer was carefully worded, respectful of her boundaries while acknowledging the practical concern. Violet hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you. That would be sensible." Wade provided her with one of his shirts to sleep in and fresh water for washing, then discreetly left her alone in the bedroom while he settled on the sofa. Violet slipped between the sheets of his bed, surrounded by his scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. Despite the strangeness of the situation, she felt safer than she had in years. Morning brought weak winter sunshine, and the realization that she had slept more soundly in Wade's bed than she had since fleeing Philadelphia. She found him in the kitchen, true to his word about making decent coffee, a skill she discovered was rare among frontier men. "There's fresh snow," he said by way of greeting, handing her a steaming cup. "Nearly a foot overnight. School might be closed today." Indeed, as they made their way through town, Violet found a note tacked to the schoolhouse door from the school board chairman, declaring classes canceled due to the severe weather. Parents had been notified, the note explained, and would keep their children home. "A day of unexpected freedom," Wade commented. "What will you do with it?" Violet considered the question. "I have lessons to plan, papers to grade. Or," he suggested, "we could go sledding." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Sledding? There's a perfect hill just beyond town." A boyish enthusiasm lightened his typically serious expression. "Unless you consider yourself too dignified for such pursuits, Mrs. Reynolds." The challenge in his voice, along with the use of her married name, sparked something playful in Violet that she had thought long dead. "I'll have you know, Marshal Reynolds, that I was the sledding champion of Lancaster County 3 years running as a girl." His grin, the first full, unrestrained smile she had seen from him, nearly took her breath away. "Then I believe we have a contest, madam." The morning passed in a blur of exhilarating runs down the pristine hillside, borrowed sleds from the general store creating twin tracks in the virgin snow. Violet's cheeks burned with cold and laughter as she and Wade raced, built increasingly elaborate jumps, and finally collapsed in exhaustion at the hill's base. "I concede," Wade said, brushing snow from his coat. "Lancaster County clearly breeds superior sledders." "A gracious admission of defeat," Violet replied, still breathless with exertion and joy. Snow crystals clung to her eyelashes, and without thinking, Wade reached out to brush them away. His gloved fingers lingered against her cheek. Violet's laughter faded, replaced by awareness of his closeness, the intensity in his gray eyes. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Wade leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Violet remained still, her heart hammering against her ribs as his lips met hers gently at first, a question rather than a demand. When she didn't retreat, his kiss deepened, becoming something neither had anticipated when this arrangement began. Violet's arms slipped around his neck, her body responding with a hunger that startled her. Wade pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair that had come loose from its pins during their sledding. The kiss stretched on, warming them despite the snow beneath their knees until they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily. Reality crashed back over Violet like ice water. What was she doing? This was meant to be a paper marriage, a convenient shield against Charles, not. Whatever this was becoming. She stood abruptly, brushing snow from her skirts with shaking hands. "We should go back, people might see." Wade rose more slowly, confusion and hurt evident in his expression. "Would that be so terrible? We are married after all." "On paper," she reminded him, and immediately regretted the words when his face closed off, the warmth and openness of the morning vanishing behind his usual reserve. "Of course," he said stiffly. "Forgive me." The walk back to town stretched in uncomfortable silence, the easy camaraderie of the morning shattered. Violet felt caught between contradictory desires, the need to protect herself from further heartbreak and the undeniable pull she felt toward Wade, a pull that went far beyond gratitude or convenience. At the schoolhouse, Wade tipped his hat formally. "I'll be at the office if you need anything, Miss James." The deliberate return to her maiden name stung more than it should have. Before Violet could respond, he turned and strode away, his back rigid with suppressed emotion. Inside her quarters, Violet paced, berating herself for the confusion she had created. She had established clear boundaries at the beginning of their arrangement, then blurred them herself with every shared meal, every confidential conversation, every moment she allowed herself to see Wade as more than a convenient protector. And that kiss, she touched her lips, still sensitive from the pressure of his. That had been no performance for watching eyes, no dutiful peck to maintain their charade. That had been real and raw and dangerously close to something she had sworn never to feel again. The next day, school resumed with children eager to share tales of their snow day adventures. Violet threw herself into teaching with renewed dedication, as if academic rigor might somehow order her chaotic emotions. Wade maintained his habit of escorting her to and from school, but kept a careful distance. Their conversations limited to polite observations about weather and town business. The strained atmosphere continued through mid-December, their public performance of martial harmony increasingly at odds with the private tension between them. Violet missed the easy companionship they had begun to develop, yet feared the consequences of allowing it to deepen into something more vulnerable. A week before Christmas, as Violet was dismissing her students for the day, she noticed Wade approaching the schoolhouse with unusual haste. His expression sent alarm coursing through her veins. "What is it?" she asked as soon as the last child had departed. "There's a man asking questions at the hotel," Wade said without preamble. Well-dressed, Eastern accent. Claiming to be a businessman considering investment in the area, but he's particularly interested in recent arrivals to town. Violet's hands clutched the edge of her desk. "Charles, I don't know. I haven't seen him myself. Simmons from the hotel sent word." Wade's eyes were grave. "We need to be prepared either way." "How?" Panic threatened to overwhelm her. "If it's him, he won't be deterred by a frontier marriage he knows isn't legal. We'll face that if it comes to it." Wade's calm steadied her. "For now, I want you to stay at my house." "No arguments," he added when she opened her mouth to protest. "If this is your husband, I don't want you alone." The urgency in his voice convinced her. "I'll pack some things." Wade waited while she gathered essentials, then escorted her through town by a circuitous route that avoided the hotel. At his house, he checked and loaded his shotgun before placing it near the door, a precaution that made the threat feel terrifyingly real. "What will we do if it is him?" Violet asked, huddled by the fire as darkness fell outside. Wade considered the question with the serious deliberation she had come to expect from him. "That depends on what he wants," he said finally. "If he's merely confirming your presence, we maintain our position that you're legally my wife now. If he attempts to force you to return..." His expression hardened. "Then we handle it differently." The implication in his words sent a chill through her. "I don't want you risking yourself for me." Wade looked at her steadily. "That's not your choice to make." The quiet certainty in his voice silenced her arguments. They ate a simple supper, both too tense for much conversation. As the evening wore on, the practical question of sleeping arrangements arose. "I'll take the sofa again," Wade offered. "No," Violet said, making a decision she had been considering since their kiss in the snow. "You should stay in your bed." She paused, gathering courage. "With me." Wade's expression showed surprise, then concern. "Violet, you don't need to." "It's not about need," she interrupted, "or obligation, or even fear, though I admit I'm terrified of what tomorrow might bring." She took a step toward him. "It's about what I want, who I want." The confession hung between them, changing everything. Wade moved slowly, giving her time to reconsider until he stood directly before her. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I don't think I could bear it if you regretted this. Regretted me." In answer, Violet rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a deliberate echo of their kiss in the snow, but with newfound certainty behind it. Wade's response was immediate and overwhelming, his arms encircling her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes even as desire coursed through her body. That night, in the shelter of Wade's bed, Violet discovered what real intimacy could be: not the duty she had endured with Charles, but a genuine communion of bodies and hearts. Wade's hands, capable of such strength, touched her with reverent gentleness. His eyes, usually so guarded, revealed every emotion as they moved together. When she cried out her release, he held her as if she were precious beyond measure, whispering her name like a prayer. Afterward, lying in his arms as the fire burned low, Violet felt a peace she had nearly forgotten was possible. Whatever came tomorrow, Charles, danger, difficult choices, she would face it with this man beside her, this unexpected gift the frontier had given her. "I love you," Wade murmured against her hair, the words simple and true. "I think I have since I watched you comfort little Sarah Mason after she fell during recess, your skirts getting muddy as you knelt beside her." Violet smiled at the memory. "That was my 3rd week in Bozeman. I'm a quick study." His arms tightened around her. "You don't need to say it back. I know this isn't what you planned, what either of us planned, but I wanted you to know in case." She silenced him with her fingers against his lips. "I love you too," she whispered. "I fought against it because I was afraid of being hurt again, of being controlled. But you've never tried to own me or change me. You've only tried to protect my freedom to choose." He kissed her fingers, then her lips, a sealing of promises beyond their legal arrangement. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the uncertainty of tomorrow temporarily banished by the certainty they had found in each other. Morning came with heavy clouds promising more snow. Violet woke to find Wade already dressed, concern evident in his face as he looked out the window. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping the quilt around herself as she joined him. "Rider coming," he said. "Still a ways off, but headed this way." Violet's heart seized. "Charles can't tell yet." Wade strapped on his gun belt. "Stay inside. If there's trouble, I'm not hiding," she interrupted. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He studied her face, then nodded. "Get dressed, quickly." By the time the rider reached their door, Violet stood beside Wade, outwardly composed despite the fear churning inside her. The knock, when it came, was authoritative, 3 sharp raps. Wade opened the door, his body angled to keep Violet partially shielded behind him. On the porch stood a man Violet had never seen before, middle-aged, well-dressed despite the trail dust, with a neat beard and intelligent eyes. "Marshal Reynolds?" the man inquired. "I'm James Wilson, attorney at law from Denver." Wade didn't relax his stance. "What business brings you to my door, Mr. Wilson?" "I represent the interests of Charles Blackwood of Philadelphia." Wilson's eyes shifted to Violet. "I believe you're acquainted with his wife, Violet Blackwood." "My wife's name is Violet Reynolds," Wade corrected coldly. "And you're trespassing on our property." Wilson remained unruffled. "May I come in? What I have to say is better discussed in private." After a moment's hesitation, Wade stepped aside, allowing the lawyer entry while keeping himself between the man and Violet. "Mr. Blackwood sent me to resolve this situation discreetly," Wilson began once they were seated at the kitchen table. "He's prepared to be generous, considering the circumstances." "Generous?" Violet found her voice. "Charles has never been generous a day in his life unless it served his interests." Wilson's expression remained neutral. "He's prepared to grant you a divorce on grounds of abandonment with a modest settlement. In return, he asks only for your discretion regarding the unfortunate incidents that precipitated your departure." Violet stared at the lawyer, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "A divorce? Charles would never willingly release me." "Circumstances have changed, Mrs. Blackwood," Wilson replied, his tone softening slightly. "Your husband is engaged to Miss Eleanor Winthrop, daughter of Senator Winthrop. The marriage is advantageous for his banking interests, but cannot proceed while he remains legally tied to you." Understanding dawned. Charles wasn't pursuing her out of love or even possession. He needed her officially removed from his life to facilitate a more advantageous match. The realization should have been insulting, but instead felt liberating. "What exactly is he proposing?" Wade asked, his hand finding violets under the table. Wilson opened his briefcase, removing several documents. "Full divorce, settlement of $5,000, mutual agreement to maintain confidentiality about the circumstances of the marriage and its dissolution. In return, Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Reynolds," Wade corrected again, "would relinquish any further claims on Mr. Blackwood's estate or business interests." Wilson spread the papers on the table. "Everything is prepared. You need only sign." Violet picked up the documents with shaking hands. The legal language was complex, but the essence was clear enough: freedom at long last. No more running, no more fear. Charles was letting her go, not out of decency but out of self-interest. It hardly mattered why. "And if I refuse?" she asked, needing to understand all options. Wilson's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Blackwood would prefer to avoid litigation, but he is prepared to contest your arrangement with Marshal Reynolds on grounds of bigamy. Given his standing and connections, such a case would likely result in serious consequences for both of you." The threat was clear, yet delivered with such polite detachment that it took a moment to register. Wade's hand tightened around hers. "So it's blackmail," he said flatly. "Sign or face charges." "I prefer to see it as a mutually beneficial resolution," Wilson countered. "Mrs. Blackwood receives her freedom and financial independence. Mr. Blackwood removes an impediment to his future plans. Everyone benefits." Violet looked at Wade, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded slightly, supporting whatever decision she made. "I'll need time to review these documents," she said finally, "and I want my own representative to examine them." Wilson seemed prepared for this response. "Of course. Judge Harrington is still in the territory, I believe. He could serve as an independent legal counsel. Mr. Blackwood authorized me to make reasonable amendments to ensure your cooperation." "And how long do I have to decide?" Violet asked. "I'll remain in Bozeman through the new year," Wilson replied. "Mr. Blackwood is anxious to resolve this matter before announcing his engagement in February." After Wilson departed, promising to return the following day, Violet and Wade sat in silence, the divorce papers between them. "It seems too easy," Violet said finally. "After everything, he's just letting me go for his own benefit," Wade reminded her, "not out of kindness, still." She traced the embossed letterhead of Wilson's law firm. "Freedom, legal freedom." Wade's expression was carefully controlled. "And what will you do with that freedom, Violet?" She looked up, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" "The settlement is generous. $5,000 would take you anywhere you wanted to go. San Francisco, New York, even Europe." His voice was steady, but she could see the fear in his eyes, fear that she might choose a life beyond Bozeman, beyond him. "Wade Reynolds," she said, moving around the table to stand before him. "Do you imagine for one moment that I would leave you now, after everything?" He looked up at her, vulnerability evident in his expression. "I wouldn't blame you if you wanted a fresh start, somewhere without memories or complications. You," she said, taking his face between her hands, "are neither a memory nor a complication. You're my future, the one I choose, freely and completely." The tension drained from his shoulders as he pulled her onto his lap, burying his face against her neck. "I wasn't sure," he confessed. "Our arrangement began as convenience. I wouldn't hold you to it if you wanted more than this town, this life can offer." "All I want," Violet said, kissing him softly, "is to sign those papers, become legally divorced from Charles Blackwood, and then marry you properly, truthfully, because we choose each other. Not because we're running from something, but because we're running toward something better." Wade's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and care. "I believe Judge Harrington would be happy to officiate. Again." They spent the afternoon reviewing Wilson's documents with meticulous care, identifying clauses that needed clarification or amendment. The following day, they met with both Wilson and Judge Harrington, who confirmed the paperwork appeared legitimate and protective of Violet's interests. "With these amendments," the judge concluded, "I believe this offers you fair resolution, Mrs. Reynolds. Or should I say, Miss James, as you'll be legally returned to that status once this is finalized." "Only temporarily, I hope," Wade said, his eyes on Violet. Wilson, observing their obvious attachment, permitted himself a small smile. "I must say, Mr. Blackwood would be most displeased to know his former wife found genuine happiness so quickly. Perhaps that knowledge is worth more than the settlement." "The settlement will do nicely," Violet replied firmly. "And you may tell Charles that I wish him well with Senator Winthrop's daughter. May she have better fortune in marriage than I did." The paperwork was signed, notarized, and dispatched to Philadelphia with Wilson, who departed Bozeman 2 days before Christmas, promising confirmation of the finalized divorce by spring. Christmas Eve found Violet and Wade hosting a small gathering at Wade's house, now truly their home. Dr. Collins and his wife, Widow Parker, the Wallace family, and several other friends from town crowded into the modest space, bringing dishes and gifts and holiday cheer. "A toast," Dr. Collins proposed, raising his glass of cider, "to the happiest married couple in Montana Territory, soon to be even more officially joined, if rumors are correct." Wade slipped his arm around Violet's waist. "Nothing official until spring," he clarified. "But yes, we'll be having another ceremony once certain legal matters are resolved." Violet leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long had finally begun to recede, replaced by a growing certainty that this man, this town, this life were exactly where she belonged. Later, after their guests had departed and they were alone by the fire, Wade presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not much, but—" Violet unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with wildflowers. Inside lay a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Wade explained. "I've had it with me all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to offer it to anyone." He took her hand. "When the divorce is final, when we can make honest vows to each other, I want you to have this if you'll accept it." Tears welled in Violet's eyes as she closed her hand around the ring. "It's perfect," she whispered. "And yes, I'll accept it, and you, and everything that comes with both." Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting Bozeman in a fresh blanket of white. But inside their home, Violet and Wade had found a warmth that no Montana winter could touch, the warmth of a love neither had expected, a future neither had dared to imagine, and a safety built not on running away, but on standing together. Spring arrived with confirmation of Violet's divorce, officially freeing her from Charles Blackwood's legal claim. On a perfect May morning with apple blossoms scenting the air, Wade and Violet exchanged vows for the second time, but this time, with their hearts fully aligned with their words. The entire town turned out to celebrate, the schoolchildren forming an honor guard with flower petals and ribbons. "I think," Wade whispered as they danced at their reception, his mother's ring now properly blessing Violet's finger, "your ex-husband did us a tremendous favor by sending you west." "And you," Violet replied, her eyes shining with happiness, "made sure he never found me again." Years later, as they watched their own children play in the yard of the home they had built together, Violet sometimes marveled at the journey that had brought her to this life. The fear and pain had not been forgotten, but they had been transformed into wisdom, into compassion, into a deep appreciation for the love she had found on the Montana frontier with the steady-eyed marshal who had protected not just her body, but her right to choose her own destiny. And when their daughter asked how they had met, Violet would smile and say simply, "Your father helped me find my way when I was lost." It wasn't the whole story, but it was the truth that mattered most, that sometimes running away can lead you exactly where you're meant to be.